I have two general comments. The first comment from this guide, I think that we need to more relate this guide to the Excel sheet. We have two Excel sheet to make the calculation, so we can this guide like the calculation of absenteeism, presenteeism with the different method of calculation. The second one is related to the analysis of the NCD context. We have to add some example how to relate, because sometimes when we do such exercise, we can find we have to calculate the ROE for only intervention when we have the cost and the benefit, and sometimes they're not more related to the institutional context of that country. So I think to move from the generic relation between the institutional context and the ROE, the results that we can find.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Jill.
Thank you, and it's really good to see the progress that's been made on this document, so thank you for all the hard work that's gone into it. And having been going through my part of the process, I can recognise things and I find it helpful. Reflecting on it from the Kyrgyzstan and Belarus experience, as we, in no particular order of comment, as we gather more examples, I think it would be good to maybe have some example boxes or put them in so people can see, so how did this look for Kyrgyzstan, or how did it look for another one. It would also be good to have something on limitations. We had a debate whether we should have a limitations section in our reports, because there were some things which made us uncomfortable around the assumptions, and we wondered how much we should make that clear. We know it wasn't, it's not a scientific paper, so we didn't want to confuse everybody. We wanted it to be readable, but we also felt uncomfortable about some of the things. So that was one issue. We had a real dilemma of how to fit the institutional context analysis together with the epidemiological part and the policy interventions possibilities. And we, those of us who are around with January will see that the report that we had in Kyrgyzstan for January is completely different to the report that we have now. And in January, we just couldn't work out how to do it. And we had them side by side, and we seemed to be just repeating things. Because the institutional context analysis also has a situation analysis bit that's more kind of at the beginning. So in the end, what we did was take the report apart and rebuild it, and we found your Vietnam and Mongolia examples helpful for that, with the way that you had focused on the risk factors, the what do you need to know about tobacco, salt, alcohol in this country. And then we looked at the main policy interventions, and we really drilled down to shake and empower and the best buys, and how did this country compare against those. And we were fortunate that tobacco status report had come out, for example, and you'll see that in the Kyrgyzstan report. And then we tried to have a thread that went through from, so these are the big issues, but simply put, these are the policy gaps that we can see if we just compare them to the policy frameworks like SHAKE. And then how did that inform what the choice would be for which policies we would focus in for the economic part? And then what are the implications in the end? And then that's where we used a bit more of the institutional context analysis, and we used less of that at the beginning. And I gave the example of the thread of salt then running through. So for Kyrgyzstan, we could see that the salt consumption was 2.5 times the WHO recommended level, and it was one of the highest in the world. And then we could see when we looked at shake interventions, it had none of them in place. And then when we actually got to the end, we found the greatest return in investment would be in salt. So they would get $12 back for every dollar equivalent or something. And so then when it got to the end, we could say, hey, there's really a story here about salt. And it gave us even more strength to focus on that. So I think when we were in January and we couldn't quite think how to fit those together, whereas I think in Kyrgyzstan, learning from the Mongolia and Vietnam reports, we've got a bit more of a storyline going. And I think now when we go to Belarus and our Turkish ones, we will try a bit harder to see if we can get that thread going through so that we then have something we can focus on at the end. But the institutional context analysis, in the end, we ended up sort of taking it apart and fitting it in to reinforce different pieces. But we thought it was really helpful to be able to say, what are they doing on shake? What are they doing against FCTC very clearly, and then use some of the softer stuff elsewhere. And the other thing we said in Kyrgyzstan was that the institutional context analysis would be available separately as a report, because there was all the work that Dove did, and we thought some of it was so politically sensitive, we didn't feel comfortable putting it in what was essentially an economic analysis report. And we didn't want to lose the clear message to the government, but we did want to advise the UN development and other partners about some of the stuff that was going on in the country. So we thought it might be better to have a kind of private seminar for at least the UN country team to say this is what we found with that. That bit we haven't done yet, but that's the bit that I think would also be a good way of using that softer stuff. Yeah, that was nice. Thank you. Oh no, sorry. There was one other point I've written down. We struggled on the direct costs, this GARG paper, and just a feedback on that. That when for Kyrgyzstan, we had to use that paper because we didn't have the actual data. But that paper says everybody's got 30% of the health expenditures going on for NCDs. So when we used real data in Belarus, national health accounts, it came out at 10%. And that was really, I mean, I was kind of not doing the fancy stuff like Anna was, but I was kind of reading through this from a public health point of view. And I said, how can this be? In both countries, the men are smoking at 50% or more. The disease burden is almost the same. And, you know, they're kind of low middle income countries. So why is it so different? And then looking back at the 13 countries, I mean, we do have a problem with that paper. 6 of the 13 are high-income countries in there. The only one that's close to Kyrgyzstan is Georgia. Everything else is upper middle income. You know, the 6 of the 13 are high income. Most of the others are upper middle income. And we're actually trying to do, where we might use this paper is in the low middle income countries who don't have the data. And this data is not that good. So we did wonder whether we should just take out Georgia and use Georgia as an example, or should we take the Belarus 10% and use that for Kyrgyzstan instead of the 30%. So we had a problem around that bit. Is that right, Anna? And also just to say, I kept saying, and it's got mental health in it, and Anna just pointed out that in the Excel table it doesn't have mental health in it. But for the purpose of your guidance note, maybe you take out the mental health line because it might be a bit confusing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Dudley, did you want to come in and say something?
I did, but I'll save it for tomorrow.
Fine, excellent. Okay, anybody else got any comments? Okay, so before Jeremy comes in, I'm going to ask a question to you. Do you think that the guidance as it stands, with your knowledge and background, which I realise is different from each and every one of you, if you put that in your rucksack and you went out to a country, armed with what Jeremy has said, and I realise there is more tomorrow, later today, would this be helpful enough for you to do it, the economic component of an investment case?
I think you've got to show the Excel tables.
Yes.
Because,
All right.
because I mean,
Say that again?
this paper is
You
not
need to see the
helpful
Excel.
enough. You need it alongside the Excel
Okay.
tables where you put
All right.
the data in.
Yeah.
Jeremy, come in now then,
No,
with your
I would-
observations.
I was just going to say that I thought I could, and then it would be very useful to have the document.
You need to put your thing.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that I could, with the document, and, you know, I mean, just to be perfectly transparent here, I don't use the One Health tool. I've never used the One Health tool. But I think that with the document and with the kind of economic understanding, I could probably go into a country and do that. So, I mean, to answer your question in the positive,
Okay, so now reflecting on where you think, so that everyone knows, where you think we are in terms of getting from what we are now to the final finished product. It'll never be finished, but good enough to be given to people to put into their rucksack. What more, coming from WHO, do you think is required, and what do you think is the sort of time frame we're looking at?
so you want me to?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to respond to that, first of all, I thought the questions and the comments that were made around the table and from, could you say your name, sir? I didn't catch.
Shukri.
Shukri, yes, okay. I thought the idea of relating it more specifically to the Excel sheet, I don't know how that would be done, but I mean, maybe you could have figures where you actually see the Excel sheet that you're going to be working with. There are some pointers to where you are in the Excel sheet when you're in different parts of the guidance document. That sounds to me like a very useful and sound recommendation. I thought Jill raised a number of, I mean, there were some other comments you made about the institutional context and so on, Shokri, that I think were extremely well taken. I don't have anything, I don't have a specific sense of, I don't have anything to add to that. But I thought the idea of bringing in this front-end specificity of relating the document to the Excel sheet could probably be done with a fairly light touch, without a complete reorganization or rewriting of the document, and that would be very useful, as slotting in figures and breakout points in the text. Turn to sheet something now, for an example of how that works. And in terms of what Jill was saying, and other, speaking on behalf of a team really that just flew in this morning from Bishkek, right? I thought that was extremely interesting to see areas in which, sort of the rule of thumb guidance that we have about this paper is a guard, may fall down in practice. And that I think, therefore, the document should probably address that up front as a limitation and as a, you do have this guard paper you can refer to, but frankly, nobody thinks it really applies in Kyrgyzstan. Therefore, what is your plan B? Something along those lines, I think, would be extremely useful. So that all has to do with kind of the front end that you could so call, the part that you're really dealing with, and you want to, the downstream bit of the analysis. My comments, the ones that come from my mind, probably not surprisingly, are having to do with introducing a greater level of conceptual and terminological clarity up front, upstream, in the early parts of the document. That, when terms are used like economic burden, that a table is shown and an enumeration, even if it's a generic one, is made of what's being counted in economic burden. And the same for costing, the same for burden of disease, the same for, this table structure, I can tell you, has been extremely well received whenever we've used it. And I do think, as an organizing principle, saying this is our accounting framework, here's what we're talking about now. And by graying out or blanking the other cells, and then making the enumeration more specific, using strike-throughs or whatever to say, we're not counting this because we don't have data. And having that accounting structure repeated through the document with reference back to the concepts that have already been established as this is the domain of what we're interested in, this is what we'd like to count, and with reference back to the discussion of these are how we're valuing those things that we'd like to count. And this is how we're adding them up, and this is how we're comparing them in a ratio. So I think having that explicit table structure throughout, especially up front, but then can be referred to, again, lightly throughout the document, I think it has to help immeasurably in terms of analysts understanding what they're doing, what are the implications of getting it wrong. Because if you're in a very detailed workflow and you're on step 23, sub-step D, and you run into a block, you need to know, does that poison the whole outcome? Or is that actually just this tiny little problem that fits into a particular table cell? And having that ability to back up and relativize and say where those problems and how much they impact on the final result. I think the table structure and thinking about those elements in the table could be extremely useful. So I would like to see, perhaps some changes to the terminology, and because less of a jargon type of, and when I say jargon, it's not a criticism, it's common, accepted, professional jargon that we all use. But things like economic burden, costing, rather than assuming these are things that people immediately know what's being referred to, give us the accounting framework for those concepts and make it very explicit what is in and what is out, and whether it's in or out because of data problems or because it's not actually of interest for the question at hand. So those would be my comments. But I think that the document is extremely useful and extremely beneficial, because I feel like armed with that document, as somebody who understands the economics, I could actually go into a country and do one of these. So I mean, that's the
bottom line.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Excuse me, I want just to add something. I'm sorry, because to give a critic to some document is very easy, but I know this good work has been done. Just what I want to say, because we have Excel sheet, model Excel. This is mechanical relation, mathematical relation. So many people don't want this kind of analysis. To say this is a set of variable, epidemiologic variable, and economic demographic. We put all them together and we have some formulation, calculation together. This is a point of view. Some people don't like to see this kind of analysis. What I want that this guide should be more related to this model, to explain a lot, because here we just give the definition of what is the human capital method, what is the willingness to pay. We can find this. We have the reference of the cast of Ines Joe. We can find this kind of definition, but what I mean, to give more sense for that definition, use it in the model, and to give in explicit and more something who related to the model that I want. So what I want to mean to make more closer relation between this guide and the model, and also we can open some. For some idea to improve the model, because there's many parts of the model that can be improved if we move from the mathematical relation for other way. Thank you.
Can I add on this point? We had this discussion within our group, what is this document is and for whom it is. And there was a discussion that there can be two separate documents. One is the guidance note, which does give the brief overview of the NCD business case to anyone who read it, not especially for health economists, but for anyone who will read it and who will use it for political, doesn't matter for whom. And the other document, it can be the manual for health economists, and it definitely have to be other types of the documents with lots of links with instruments, with screenshots of some critical things and so on. There was a discussion, what is this document and for whom it is.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
I think it would be better to have those different documents. For me, as a health economist, I have lots of questions regarding the methodology, especially indirect costs, the calculation of indirect costs, willingness to accept, willingness to pay. There is huge difference even between those methods, human capital approach. So I think it would be better to have separate documents, the description of the concept and the manual for health economists. Because, you know, our agency, we conducted several studies, the cost of illness, and in Russia we have this lack of information, the statistics, and there is quite difference between the research and everything depends on methodology, which methodology you apply. So maybe it would be better to be more strict to describe the accepted methodology than because it implies the comparability of the studies between the countries. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Jeremy, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I mean, I suppose I hear comments that are kind of going in two complementary directions. I don't want to say opposing directions, but complementary. And one of them has to do with the analyst who is going to be conducting the work and using the tools. And for that person, it's very important to have a clear process, ordered process for structuring the analysis. For another related but somehow not the same identical audience, it's very important to know what are the limitations, the weaknesses, where are the points where judgments were made about are we using the willingness to pay or willingness to accept and why. All of those methodological questions where economists will have strong opinions, but analysts may not, also need to be somehow better addressed. So I think we need to, let's say we have a production line. The middle part is solidly there. There's some part that needs to be pushed a little further this direction, and some part that also needs to be pushed a little further back upstream, more towards the theory, and also pushed a little further more towards the practice. We're in a good average middle space, but it needs a little bit more on each side, I think, to fill it out. And then perhaps the document itself will have a structure where, through an outline, a table of contents, these pieces, which are more process-related and more theory-related, can be, the reader can orient.
Okay.
So that the main comment I have is, I feel some of the comments on the table from users and from stakeholders that would be interested in this are at different ends of that spectrum, that's all.